Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story: the Chinese regime is introducing a new form of group leadership, something that can directly challenge Xi's grip on power. A veteran China analyst sheds light on the matter. Trump says there's a group of very wealthy people ready to buy TikTok, and he's confident the deal will go through.
I'll tell you in about 2 weeks.
A former high-ranking New York State employee and her husband pleading not guilty today in Brooklyn Federal Criminal Court. Anti-Chinese Communist Party events in New York City. The End CCP campaign isn't only important for China, it touches the lives of Americans too.
共产党支持美国！共产党支持美国！共产党支持中国！共产党支持中国！
Chinese state media reports that a new group has been formed at the very highest levels of the Chinese Communist Party. Analysts tell us it's a sign that Xi Jinping's grip on power is weakening. The group was reportedly established on Monday to oversee major state affairs. It was formed after a meeting of China's Politburo Standing Committee. That's the Chinese regime's top leadership body. Here's veteran China affairs analyst Tang Jingyuan.
Although Xi Jinping still holds the titles of General Secretary of the CCP, Chinese regime leader, and head of the China's Central Military Commission, the actual power and decision-making dynamics have already shifted. That power has now been transferred to a newly formed body known as the Agency of Decision-Making, Deliberation, and Coordination. This agency can be seen as a supergroup with immense power, one that oversees everything from policymaking to implementation. It can intervene at every stage and holds the final say on major decisions, and now it's also a legitimate governing group.
According to Chinese state media, this new group has three major roles: decision-making, deliberation, and coordination. In other words, all major Chinese affairs will go through the group.
This can be seen as a major restructuring and transfer of Xi Jinping's power. It looks like the regime has officially declared a complete end to the era in which Xi held absolute authority.
The new group is an apparent challenge to what Xi has been working towards, a party where he alone is the central power. Since Xi took office in 2013, he has purged countless officials deemed not loyal to him and replaced them with loyalists. He also formed dozens of small groups across security, finance, diplomacy, defense, and so forth. He made himself leader of them all. This tactic gave him direct control over a broad range of national affairs. It was his strategy for asserting power. In 2018, under Xi's control, China's legislative body revised the Chinese constitution. It scrapped term limits for the regime's highest leadership positions. That meant he could theoretically stay in power for as long as he wanted. But last year, signs that Xi's grip on power is weakening started to show. For example, some of Xi's top military aides mysteriously disappeared. Some were removed from their posts.
In my view, this shift in Xi Jinping's power has, to a large extent, eliminated the immediate and urgent risk of war over Taiwan in the short term. However, in the long run, as long as the Chinese communist regime still exists, the danger of a Taiwan Strait War and the threat of Taiwan being annexed will always remain.
Then who is leading the internal opposition against Xi? Tang and many China analysts point to several veteran regime leaders, including former regime head Hu Jintao, former Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao, and the Chinese military second-in-command Zhang Youxia. NTD was among the first media outlets to report on signs that Xi's power is declining. In recent months, newspapers, including Nikkei Asia and the New York Post, have also published analysis hinting at a major shakeup in Beijing. President Donald Trump says there's a group of very wealthy people ready to buy TikTok. He made the announcement in an interview aired Sunday on Fox News.
We have a buyer for TikTok, by the way. I think I'll need probably China approval, and I think President Xi will probably do it.
Who's buying?
I'll tell you in about 2 weeks.
A big technology company there.
Very, very wealthy people. It's a group of very wealthy people.
Earlier this month, Trump extended to mid-September a deadline for China-based ByteDance to divest the US assets of TikTok. A deal had been in the works in the spring, which would have spun off the video app's US operations into a new US-based and majority-owned firm. However, that was put on ice after China indicated it would not approve it following Trump's imposition of steep tariffs on its goods. A 2024 law mandated the closure of TikTok in the US by January 19th this year, unless its operations in the country were divested or there was evidence of major progress on a sale. Trump has now extended that deadline 3 times, after crediting the app with helping him win last year's election.
During the Fox News interview, President Trump also talked about China tariffs. The U.S. imports far more from China than it exports. Trump wants to change this. There's also the issue of America's reliance on China for important things like rare earth metals used in manufacturing. Maria Bartiromo also asked him about the Chinese nationals who allegedly try to bring pathogens into the United States. Take a look.
But I want to get your take on China, really, because you've announced an agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, whereas China will export the rare earth minerals. Yeah. What does that mean in terms of this upcoming tariff structure? You've got a pause in terms of the more steep tariffs that ends August 12th. Are you going to extend that? Are you going to keep that in place or go back to a higher tariff on China?
China's going to be paying a lot of tariffs, but we have a big deficit. They understand that. I have a great relationship with President Xi. We have to do something about the deficit because we have a big trade deficit with China. Biden let it get up to $1 trillion. Think of it, $1 trillion deficit with one country. He let them just take them over the coals. We're not going to do that. But we're doing a rare earth deal, but we're also doing, remember, we have all of the airplane parts. They can't fly their airplanes without us. So we had, some cards also. But it should have never gotten that way because we should have been doing they call it magnets. It's a rare earth, but they call it magnets, a specific type. And they're making those magnets for us right now, and things are well. And we have a deal with China. It's a good deal, I think, hopefully for everybody. We had a deal with China where it was 145% tariffs. And I will tell you, everything stopped in China. I saw that. Everything stopped. And we did China a favor, but we're getting along well with China. I think getting along well with China is a very good thing, but they are paying substantial tariffs.
Well, I noticed that because it seems like you go so far with China, but you don't sort of use the leverage that you can use. I mean, look.
If I ever had to use it, I'd use it, but when there's no reason to use it, that's good too.
Well, we did just arrest 3 or 4 Chinese nationals who tried to bring a pathogen into the country that gets people sick and destroys food supply. We've got hacking.
You don't know where that came from, though. I mean, did that come from the country, or is that 3 wackos that happened to carry something? You just don't.
Well, there was one that he signed that he would be, one of them signed a paper saying that he would value Mao Zedong's value system. So there was that. And then they hack into our telecom system. They've been stealing intellectual property. They fentanyl, COVID. I mean, all of this stuff. So how do you negotiate with obviously a bad actor and trust them on economics?
You don't think we do that to them? We do.
So
we do a lot of things.
That's the way the world works?
It's the way the world works. It's a nasty world.
And then you just do a trade deal?
We do. Well, we made a lot of money with this trade deal. I do a trade deal if it works. We made a lot of money with the trade deal.
You think that China is going to stop bullying companies to give them information in terms of in exchange for getting those rare earth minerals now?
Well, the companies shouldn't put themselves in that position. They really shouldn't. Now, I will say this. China right now needs those companies much more than they needed them 2 years ago. 2 years ago, China could do that. Today, they can't because they need those companies. They need Apple. They need all of, Apple's spending $600 billion, $700 billion in the United States building plants. They were never going to do that. Think of it, $700 billion. But a lot of the companies that are in China are now relocating back to the United States. So, yeah, China's going to treat them much better as they need them.
A former high-ranking New York State government employee, Linda Sun, and her husband pleaded not guilty today at a Brooklyn federal criminal court arraignment. The two are charged with being involved in a fraudulent scheme to steer government contracts to family businesses. She and her husband allegedly received millions of dollars, including some kickbacks. Here's more on what's happening.
Former New York aide Linda Sun and her husband Christopher Hu pleaded not guilty to a second superseding indictment on Monday. Both of them were initially indicted last September on various charges, including fraud. They appeared at the Eastern District of New York courthouse with their team of attorneys. Both of them are facing additional charges, including fraud, money laundering, and bribery. Sun, who previously worked for Governors Andrew Cuomo and Kathy Hochul, appeared tired and nervous Monday as she entered the courtroom. The charges on Monday relate to her work during the COVID pandemic. Under former Governor Cuomo, Sun was assigned to work on a team that was responsible for procuring contracts with vendors that would provide face masks. Sun is accused of falsifying documents to replace one or more approved vendors with vendor businesses operated by her family and friends. Her husband allegedly owns one of the vendor businesses. They both are accused of enriching themselves with millions of dollars, both directly and through kickbacks. Previously, Sun was charged with acting as an undisclosed agent of the Chinese Communist Party, while her husband allegedly facilitated the transfer of millions of dollars in kickbacks for personal gain. Sun, who worked as Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Kathy Hochul, allegedly used her position of influence to covertly promote CCP agendas, which prosecutors say directly threatens national security. The parties are expected to return to court on August 25th for a status conference in preparation for a November 3rd trial date. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
A powerful message sent from the streets of New York as the Chinese Communist Party prepares to mark its 104th anniversary, a protest calling for the regime's end. Over the weekend, pro-democracy groups gathered in Flushing, New York, home to the largest Chinese community in America. Victims of the regime spoke at the event. They said confronting the CCP is not just important for China, but for America's future as well.
Mike Cohen, a former journalist, has a personal connection to China. His father was born in Shanghai, years before the Communist Party took control of the mainland.
America was a very strong partner and friend of China. The sad thing is what the CCP did. They corrupted China. In fact, the CCP is probably the biggest criminal organization in the world.
On Sunday, Mike took part in a series of anti-CCP events in Flushing, New York, home to America's largest Chinese community. The events were organized by the Chinese Democracy and Human Rights Alliance, the Federation for a Democratic China, and other pro-democracy groups and advocates. The goal was to raise awareness about the true nature of the Chinese Communist Party. Demonstrators held banners bearing bold and unmistakable messages, making their stance clear to all who passed by.
Today on American soil, we deeply sense the Communist Party's infiltration. That's why we are committed to doing everything we can to drive it out.
The message of End CCP was echoed by well-known Taiwanese YouTuber Pa Chi-young. His democratic Taiwan faces the very real threat of invasion from communist China.
The United States should know better than Taiwan how to deal with communism and guard against Communist Party infiltration. After all, you faced this before during the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Now it's the Chinese Communist Party. The name may be different, but at its core, it's still the same Marxist-Leninist ideology.
Pa is calling on the American people to rediscover the spiritual courage and convictions that once guided the U.S. in its struggle against the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. July 1st marks the 104th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party.
The Chinese Communist Party has existed for 104 years, and its impact on the Chinese people has been devastating, causing the unnatural deaths of over 100 million. What the party celebrates as its anniversary is, in reality, a reminder of the suffering it has inflicted on the people.
My hope is that through today's event, and through everything we continue to do, we can ultimately eliminate the Communist Party's presence.
Nike is facing a tough challenge. The sportswear giant is trying to ease the impact of Trump's sweeping global tariffs by shifting some production away from China. Here's more.
On Thursday, the company said it would reduce its reliance on China for manufacturing goods it sells in the US as part of the strategy. China currently accounts for about 16% of the shoes it imports to the United States. And Nike aims to cut that to the high single digits range by the end of May next year. Investors welcomed the news, sending Nike shares soaring 11% in after-hours trade. Also helping sentiment were forecast-beating results for the latest period. Fourth quarter sales sank 12%, but analysts had expected even worse. China is the pain point there too, with executives saying a turnaround in the country will take time amid a weak economy and mounting competition. The company is now a bit more optimistic than analysts about the coming period, however. It predicts sales will see a percentage fall in the mid-single digits, or less than Wall Street has forecast. Analysts say running shoes are doing well for Nike, making up for expected declines in the sales of regular sneakers.
Coming up, Taiwan's vice president responds to Beijing's plan to physically intimidate her during her trip to Europe. The Czech government says Europe has never seen anything like it. China's massive military buildup worries the West. How likely is it that China and Russia will work together, and what's at stake?
If China pressures Russia into making a move in Eastern Europe that they're not actually prepared for, or they miscalculate, that could lead to a huge conflagration, and perhaps that's the biggest danger.
Details on that and more after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Taiwan's vice president has responded to Beijing's plan to physically intimidate her during her visit to Czech last March. Czech military intelligence said on Friday that Chinese secret agents plotted a staged car crash involving Xiaobi Kim. The crash never happened, but Czech intelligence called Beijing's plot unprecedented. It said there's never been anything like it on European soil. On Saturday, Xiaobi Kim responded, saying, "I had a great visit to Prague and thanked the Czech authorities for their hospitality and ensuring my safety. The CCP's unlawful activities will not intimidate me from voicing Taiwan's interests in the international community." Taiwan's democratically elected government is facing growing military, diplomatic, and economic threats from Beijing. China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, recently said Beijing must bring Taiwan under the regime's rule. A Taiwanese presidential spokesperson has demanded an apology from Beijing for targeting its vice president. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, commenting on the potential for a Chinese attack on Taiwan, he expressed concern about China's massive military buildup and noted that 3 to 5 of the world's top 10 defense companies are now from China. Compare that to just a few years ago when none of the top 10 were China-based. To discuss, entities Don Ma was joined by Adam Savitt, director of the China Policy Initiative at America First Policy Institute. Take a look.
Mark Rutte says that if China attacks Taiwan, Russia could create a military distraction in Europe to support Beijing. What's the likelihood of this in your mind?
Well, I'll put it this way. The likelihood that they would want to help Beijing distract is definitely there. Whether they can, they're going to have to be creative, because here's the thing. There's some disagreement on how distracted they are in Ukraine or how overextended they are in Ukraine as far as their weapon systems, as far as their personnel, as far as their economy and energy. But everyone agrees that they are definitely diverted to some degree, and so therefore mounting a real attack on NATO's eastern flank, those Eastern European countries, as well as Finland and the Baltic states, that would be very difficult and probably unwise, because although sometimes we criticize Europe for being underprepared, that would still be a huge mountain for Russia to climb. They do not want to instigate that sort of reprisal. So I'm thinking they might actually do something indirect, something like perhaps activate their North Korean ally. Now, the North Koreans have helped Russia in Ukraine, providing thousands of troops, and Russia has provided technology and shipbuilding expertise to North Korea. So I would think of a more creative angle like that.
Okay, but hypothetically speaking, in Rutte's scenario, how dangerous would a coordinated move between China and Russia simultaneously be?
If they did do that, and if they were able to pull it off, it would be incredibly dangerous. We're talking about 2 nuclear powers, huge continental land masses. Of course, Russia being the top nuclear power, the most warheads in the entire world. And yes, they can cause a lot of problems. And I'd say actually a big risk there is miscalculation. If China pressures Russia into making a move in Eastern Europe that they're not actually prepared for, or they miscalculate, that could lead to a huge conflagration, and perhaps that's the biggest danger.
Okay, so how solid is the no limits partnership? You heard of that phrase between Xi and Putin. Is it really no limit?
It is not no limits. It is absolutely a marriage of convenience. Now, both of them are against American and Western hegemony. That's the main glue that's holding them together. But let's look at, the no limits partnership. And of course, the two other junior partners or informal axis are Iran and North Korea. This week, we had some important activities in Iran, and Iran is greatly degraded in their nuclear program as well as their general ability to deter in the Middle East. And did Russia and China come to their aid? They did not. So, I mean, there's real strictures here when the rubber hits the road and when the U.S. applies its power. There's limits. There's limits. It's not no limits. There's limits to what these countries can do for each other. And ultimately, China and Russia's interests do not align on some very important things. They have underlying border disputes in the east of Russia. They have conflicts over resources in eastern Russia and those sorts of tensions. They actually have tensions over North Korea because now Russia's become a closer ally to North Korea than China is. There's all sorts of layers here, all sorts of ways to pry them apart from each other. It is not no limits.
Okay, so Mark Rutte also said today, that NATO would not opt out of a conflict involving Taiwan. Can you paint us a picture here of what role would NATO practically play in an Indo-Pacific crisis?
Yeah, well, practically they would not play a kinetic role, as we say. They would not have a meaningful naval or air component that they could commit to a Taiwan contingency. For that, we would have to rely on our regional partners, our treaty allies such as Japan and the Philippines, and these mini-lateral arrangements like the Quad, which includes also India and Australia. We need those allies to be in concert with us and applying their forces and being diplomatically aligned with us. That's the key in the Indo-Pacific. It's more what Rutte is pointing to, that NATO's role would be more backfilling us over in Europe, making sure nothing goes wrong there. As far as NATO's role in the East, it would be pre-war diplomatic and otherwise deterrent signaling. For example, freedom of movement or freedom of navigation movements through the Taiwan Strait, as well as the South China Sea. We've seen the UK and Germany pass their ships through those passages. As far as an actual hot war, practically, there's not very much they can do.
That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Jody Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For on-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.